Chapter 1. The Last Chocolate Bar. The Forgotten Outpost. The trading post of Zinthari, for had once been a thriving hub of commerce, a waypoint for smugglers, mercenaries, and traders passing through the outer colonies. Now, it was little more than a graveyard of forgotten ambitions. Neon signs flickered weakly, barely illuminating the cracked pavement beneath Kieran Voss's boots. The air was thick with dust and the scent of rusted machinery. The distant hum of malfunctioning power grids the only sign that this place wasn't completely abandoned. Kieran had no business being here. He was a scavenger, a drifter, making his way from system to system, never staying in one place too long. The corporate overlords who controlled most of the galaxy had little interest in places like this, and that suited him just fine. He adjusted the strap of his pack, settling into a quiet corner of the outpost's dilapidated plaza. There was nothing left here worth taking, no supplies, no fuel, no salvageable tech. But there was one thing he had left. He reached into his coat and pulled out a single, slightly melted chocolate bar, the last one he had managed to save from his last real supply haul. His stomach growled, a sharp reminder of how long it had been since he'd had anything decent to eat. He had been rationing food for weeks, surviving on nutrient packs and whatever he could trade or steal. But this was a luxury. He peeled back the wrapper, about to take a bite. Then he heard it. A soft sound, barely audible over the distant hum of old generators. A whimper. Kieran froze, his instincts immediately kicking in. His hand went to the sidearm at his belt, his muscles tensing as he scanned the shadows. And then he saw her. The alien girl, huddled near a pile of discarded metal crates, wrapped in a tattered cloak, was a girl. Or at least, she looked like a girl until he got closer. She had deep violet skin, smooth but slightly bruised, and silver-white hair that fell messily over her shoulders. Her golden eyes glowed faintly, even in the dim light, and her delicate features were marred by exhaustion and hunger. She was starving. Kieran could see it in the way she curled into herself, her thin fingers clutching the edge of her cloak. She had the look of someone who hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. For a moment, he considered walking away. This wasn't his problem. The outer colonies were full of orphans and refugees, people who had been left behind by the wars and the corporate expansion. He'd seen plenty of them before, begging, stealing, doing whatever it took to survive. And yet, something about her made him pause. Something about the way she looked at him, her eyes flicking toward the chocolate bar in his hands, but then quickly looking away, as if ashamed for wanting it. Kieran sighed. "Here," he muttered, tearing the bar in half and extending a piece toward her. The girl's eyes widened. She hesitated, staring at the offered food as if it were a precious artifact. Then, with trembling fingers, she took it. She bit into it slowly, and the moment the chocolate touched her tongue, tears welled in her eyes. Kieran watched in quiet fascination as she tried to hold back a sob, as if the taste of something sweet, something real, was too much for her to handle. It wasn't just hunger. It was something deeper, something he didn't understand yet. "You all right?" he asked. She swallowed, nodding shakily. I haven't tasted anything like this in so long." Her voice was soft, melodic, but there was something about it, something strange, something unnatural. Kieran frowned. Who was she? And more importantly, what was she doing here? The warning. "You shouldn't be here," Kieran said, glancing around. "This place isn't safe." The girl wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. "I know. I was just hiding." Hiding? That set off alarm bells in Kieran's head. Hiding from what? She hesitated. Then, before she could answer, a deep, metallic voice echoed through the plaza. "All unregistered life forms must surrender immediately." Kieran spun around, cursing under his breath. A squad of corporate enforcers had entered the outpost, their black armor gleaming under the flickering neon lights. Their weapon shock rifles and pulse batons were already raised, their visors scanning the area. The girl tensed beside him, her entire body going rigid. Kieran glanced at her. Her golden eyes widened in fear. "They're here for me," she whispered. And in that moment, everything clicked into place. She wasn't just some starving refugee. She was something else entirely. Something that these heavily armed enforcers were willing to kill to capture. Kieran had spent years in the outer colonies. He had smuggled fugitives, avoided bounty hunters, outmaneuvered corporate security forces. And he knew what it meant when a group like this came in, weapons ready. This wasn't a standard patrol. They were hunting. And the girl beside him? She was their prey. Kieran tightened his grip on his sidearm, feeling the weight of it against his palm. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know why they wanted her. But he did know one thing. They weren't taking her. Not without a fight. Chapter 2. The Chase. The moment the enforcers entered the plaza, Kieran knew he had seconds to decide. His instinct screamed at him to walk away, to disappear into the ruins before these corporate thugs even noticed him. But when he glanced at the alien girl beside him, her wide golden eyes filled with terror, he knew he couldn't. Come on. Before she could protest, Kieran grabbed her wrist and ran. The enforcers immediately spotted them. Target acquired. Engage pursuit. The first shot rang out a high-pitched whine of a stun rifle as an electric bolt streaked past Kieran's ear, blasting a nearby wall into sparks. They barely made it past the first set of crumbling buildings before the enforcers opened fire in full force. Dodging death. Why are you helping me? She panted as they sprinted through the ruins. Kieran gritted his teeth. I ask myself that question every damn day. A metallic drone swooped overhead, scanning the area with bright red sensors, locking onto their heat signatures. They have drones, she gasped. Not for long. Kieran yanked a small EMP grenade from his belt, twisted the primer, and hurled it into the air. The device pulsed blue, sending a shockwave through the area. The drone fizzled and crashed, smoke curling from its circuits. Nice throw. The girl sounded almost impressed. Yeah? Let's see if you're impressed when we don't get shot. A plasma blast struck the ground ahead of them, sending chunks of pavement flying. They skidded to a stoplight on the edge of a massive drop, leading into the abandoned Undercity. End of the road, scavenger. Kieran whirled around. The enforcers were already closing in, their weapons raised, tactical boots kicking up dust as they moved with military precision. A dark armored figure stepped forward, his voice laced with synthetic distortion. The girl is coming with us. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Kieran glanced at her. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her fingers twitching at her sides. Then he saw it. The way her eyes glowed slightly brighter. The way the air seemed to shimmer around her skin for a second. She's not normal. The enforcer commander took a step forward. I won't ask again. Surrender the asset. Kieran grinned. Yes, see. I have this thing about people telling me what to do. And then, he grabbed the girl and jumped, falling into the abyss. For a split second, they were airborne. The Undercity stretched below them, a labyrinth of dark steel and forgotten ruins. Then they hit a slanted metal ramp, sliding down at a terrifying speed, sparks flying from Kieran's boots as he tried to slow their fall. The girl wrapped her arms around his torso, holding on for dear life. They dropped into the darkness, smashing through a brittle ceiling and landing in a heap of dust and rubble. Everything hurt, but they were alive. Are you insane? She coughed, struggling to sit up. Probably, yeah. Kieran groaned, rolling onto his back. Above them, the enforcer shouted, trying to track them through scanners. They didn't have much time. We need to move, she whispered. Oh, now you're giving orders? Kieran muttered. Great. Love that. She grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. We can't stay here. Kieran studied her for a moment. She had fear in her eyes. But beneath it, there was something else. Something more dangerous. What are you? He asked. For the first time, she hesitated. Then, softly, almost afraid to say it out loud, she whispered, Not what you think. And Kieran had the sinking feeling that he had just gotten himself into something far bigger than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 3. The Truth Beneath the Stars. The Undercity stretched before them, a forgotten skeleton of Zinthari IV's past, swallowed by time and darkness. The air was thick with the scent of rusted steel, damp concrete, and the distant hum of ancient generators still clinging to life. Shadows twisted in the corners, forming unnatural shapes as dim neon lights flickered along the edges of collapsed structures, remnants of a civilization long abandoned. Kieran's boots echoed against the metal flooring as he led the girl deeper into the maze of decaying tunnels, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. He had been running on instinct, saving her, dragging her through gunfire, leaping into the abyss with nothing but a gut feeling that he had to. But now that they had a brief moment of respite, he wasn't sure if he had just made the worst decision of his life. His hand tightened around the grip of his sidearm as he slowed his pace, turning to look at her properly for the first time since they'd escaped. She was shaking, whether from exhaustion, cold, or something deeper, he couldn't tell. Her silver hair was tangled, framing her face in wild strands, but her golden eyes, those damn eyes, still glowed in the darkness, carrying something more than fear. Something ancient, something powerful, something she was clearly trying to hide. He didn't need to be a genius to know she wasn't just some lost refugee. The corporate enforcers had hunted her with military precision. They hadn't been trying to kill her. They wanted her alive. And that was the most dangerous kind of pursuit. "All right," Kieran finally said, his voice low, steady. "I just risked my life, jumped off a goddamn building, and probably pissed off an entire corporate war division to save you. So before we keep running, I think I deserve to know one thing." She looked up at him, silent, waiting. Kieran took a step closer, voice dropping into something just shy of a growl. "What the hell are you?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Her hands curled into the tattered fabric of her cloak, and she turned her gaze away, staring at the distant glow of ancient city lights, lost in thought. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "My name is Sarah, and I'm not supposed to exist." Not the answer he was expecting. Kieran crossed his arms, jaw tightening. "Not supposed to exist? That's real comforting." She exhaled, shoulders slumping slightly. "You don't understand. They aren't after me because of who I am. They're after me because of what I am." Kieran resisted the urge to shake her. "Then explain. Because right now, all I know is that you eat chocolate like it's sacred, and corporate enforcers would rather tear a city apart than let you escape." She hesitated again, then finally, carefully, she lifted a hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air around her palm shimmered. A faint, golden aura flickered to life, wrapping around her fingers like liquid energy. The very space around her seemed to warp, as if reality itself wasn't sure whether to accept her presence or reject it. Kieran took a half step back on instinct, his pulse spiking. "What the hell is that?" Sarah's expression was unreadable. "It's why they want me." The energy faded, retreating back into her skin, leaving behind nothing but silence between them. Kieran forced himself to breathe evenly, his mind scrambling to put the pieces together. "You're enhanced?" he guessed. "Some kind of genetic experiment?" She shook her head. "No, I was born like this." Kieran frowned. That didn't make sense. Humans had their fair share of genetic modifications, but the kind of energy she had just displayed? That wasn't human tech. That wasn't something natural. It was something else. "Keep talking," he said warily. Sarah took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know why the corporations control everything?" she asked. "Why they expand across the galaxy, swallowing planets, species, entire civilizations?" Kieran scoffed. "Yeah, greed, power, the usual." She shook her head. "That's the surface reason. The real reason is because they're looking for something." He narrowed his eyes. "For what?" Her golden gaze locked onto his. "For people like me." A cold weight settled in Kieran's gut. He had spent his life avoiding entanglements, keeping his head down, scavenging, surviving, but the look in her eyes told him whatever he had stumbled into was bigger than he could ever imagine. "How many?" he asked, barely recognizing his own voice. Sarah's throat tightened. "I don't know. We were hidden. We were supposed to be protected, but they found us, one by one, and now I'm the only one left." The words hung in the air like a curse. Kieran ran a hand down his face, exhaling sharply. "All right. Fantastic. So you're telling me I just rescued the most wanted person in the galaxy?" Sarah winced. "Pretty much." Kieran shook his head, muttering a curse. God damn it. He should have left her. Should have walked away the moment he realized she was trouble. But he didn't. And now? Now he had a target painted on his back, just as big as hers. A low rumble echoed through the Undercity, distant but growing louder. Kieran tensed, immediately recognizing the sound. "We need to move. Now." Sarah looked at him. "What is it?" Kieran grabbed her wrist, pulling her into a sprint. "Hunters." The hunt begins. They ran through the maze of decaying tunnels, the distant sound of approaching engines growing louder, closer. Kieran knew what was coming: corporate drop teams, heavily armed, built for one thing: capturing high-value targets. And right now, that was both of them. The first explosion rocked the Undercity, sending shrapnel and dust cascading from above. Kieran grabbed Sarah, pulling her against the wall as a squad of armored figures rappelled down from a hovering gunship, landing with practiced efficiency. Their visors glowed crimson, scanning the area with laser precision. One of them turned. Target acquired. Run. Kieran barely had time to push Sarah forward before the first shots lit up the darkness, bolts of ion energy shattering metal as they tore through the air. Kieran returned fire, his old scavenger pistol barking as he took out the nearest soldier with a shot between the plating of his armor. Sarah moved faster than he expected, dodging left, right, twisting her body in ways that didn't seem humanly possible. But it wasn't enough. The second enforcer raised his rifle, locking onto her. And then, before Kieran could react, she turned. There was a flash of golden light, a ripple in the air as something exploded outward from her body, like an invisible wave of energy. The enforcers were lifted off their feet, slammed into the walls with enough force to dent metal. The silence that followed was deafening. Kieran stood there, breathing heavily, gun still raised. He looked at Sarah. She looked terrified. "I didn't mean to dash." Kieran didn't let her finish. He grabbed her wrist, eyes burning with adrenaline. "We'll deal with that later." He pulled her into a sprint. "Right now, we run." And as they disappeared into the Undercity, chased by the echoes of alarms and distant warships, Kieran realized something terrifying. He hadn't just saved her life. He had changed his own forever. Chapter 4. A Starborn's Destiny. The Undercity trembled with distant explosions, each tremor sending dust and debris cascading from the forgotten structures above. Kieran's pulse hammered in his ears as he and Sarah sprinted deeper into the labyrinth of ruined tunnels. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even know where they were going. All he knew was that if they stopped running, they were dead. Behind them, the corporate enforcers were regrouping. He could hear the whine of active scanners, the crackling voices over comms, the stomping of boots on metal and stone. They had only moments before the chase resumed. "Where the hell are we going?" Kieran hissed, half dragging Sarah along as she struggled to keep up. "I don't know," she gasped, glancing over her shoulder, her golden eyes wide with panic. Kieran clenched his jaw. This was insane. He'd spent years staying out of trouble, drifting through the outer colonies, scavenging and avoiding anything that even smelled like corporate business. And now he was neck-deep in it, running with the most wanted girl in the galaxy, whose powers defied the very laws of physics. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Not yet. Not while they were still alive. The tunnel ahead curved sharply, leading into what looked like an old transport station, its walls lined with derelict hover trams covered in rust and grime. Kieran pulled Sarah inside the first abandoned tram, crouching low as he peered through a cracked viewport. Outside, the enforcers were spreading out, scanning every possible exit. They weren't going away. "We can't outrun them forever," Kieran muttered. "We need another way out." Sarah swallowed hard, her breath uneven. "There is one," she said hesitantly. Kieran turned to her sharply. "I'm all ears, sweetheart. Because unless you can teleport us out of here, I don't see a damn escape route." Sarah flinched at the sarcasm, but she didn't argue. Instead, she closed her eyes, her fingers trembling as she pressed her palm against the rusted floor of the tram. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air shimmered, like heat waves rippling off hot metal, and beneath them, the floor groaned and shifted as if something deep within the ruins had awakened. Kieran's heart slammed against his ribs. The girl wasn't just running from the corporations. She was connected to something much bigger than he had realized. Something ancient. Something buried beneath the very ground they stood on. "What the hell are you doing?" Kieran demanded, grabbing her wrist. Sarah's eyes snapped open. "I'm calling it." Before Kieran could ask what it was, the ground rumbled violently, nearly knocking them off their feet. Then, a massive structure began to emerge from the depths of the Undercity. The Starborn Vault. The entire chamber trembled as ancient machinery roared to life, pushing aside centuries of dust and ruin. The enforcers outside immediately reacted, shouting in alarm as their scanners malfunctioned, their weapons sparking from the sudden electromagnetic interference. Kieran barely had time to process what was happening before an enormous set of metallic doors, hidden beneath the tram station for what had to be thousands of years, slowly began to slide open. And inside, a ship waited. Not a human ship, not a corporate vessel, something else entirely. Kieran's breath caught in his throat. The ship was sleek, silver, and pulsating faintly with golden veins of energy, as if it were alive. Its design was unlike anything he had ever seen before, a perfect blend of organic fluidity and impossible technology. And standing at its base were more of them, more like Sarah. Their eyes glowed like twin suns, their robes shimmering with the same golden aura she had used before. Their expressions were unreadable, but their presence alone sent a deep chill down Kieran's spine. Sarah let out a shaky breath. They found me. Kieran tightened his grip on his pistol, his mind racing. Who the hell are they? Sarah turned to him, her expression a mix of relief and sorrow. My people. The last of them. Kieran exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. All right. You're gonna need to start explaining real fast, because I'm about 5 seconds away from losing my mind. Sarah hesitated, but she knew there was no more hiding the truth. We were the first. Kieran frowned. First what? Her voice was soft, almost reverent. The first to touch the stars. Kieran blinked. Come again? Sarah turned back to the ancient ship, her fingers brushing against its surface. The energy beneath its hull reacted to her touch, glowing brighter. Before humans. Before corporations. Before the galaxy was divided by greed and war. She paused, then looked at him with an expression that sent a shiver down his spine. We were here. Kieran stared at her. The implications of what she was saying hit him like a freight hauler. She wasn't just a fugitive. She wasn't just an experiment. She was part of something ancient, something forgotten, something that the corporations had been searching for all along. Jesus, Sarah. Kieran took a step back, shaking his head. You're saying you're from some kind of ancient civilization? She nodded. Not just any civilization. Her voice trembled. The first one. The ones who seeded life across the stars. The ones who built worlds. And the ones who were wiped out when they refused to let the corporations take control. Kieran exhaled slowly, his mind spinning. If what she was saying was true, if her people really were the first interstellar race, then that meant the corporations had spent centuries wiping them out, trying to erase them from history. And now, they were finishing the job. The distant sound of corporate gunships echoed above them. The enforcers weren't giving up. Kieran looked at Sarah. Then he looked at the waiting Starship A vessel from a civilization long thought lost. And he knew there was no going back. He grabbed her hand. You said this ship is yours? Sarah nodded. It will fly for me. Kieran grinned. Then let's get the hell out of here. Final escape. The ship's engines roared to life, golden light pulsing through its veins as it responded to Sarah's presence. The first corporate gunship descended, opening fire, but it was too late. The ancient vessel shattered gravity, launching skyward in a blinding streak of light. As they broke through the atmosphere, Kieran looked back at the dying world of Zinthari, the place where he had shared his last chocolate bar with a girl he never should have met. And yet, somehow, that single act had just changed the fate of the galaxy. Because the first civilization wasn't gone. They were returning. And Kieran Voss was now part of their war.